There is a hope.
Thank you for joining us today for On the Road with Jesus, hosted by Rhodey Fisher. As a Christian mom for over 40 years and a teacher of the Bible in public schools for 25 years, Rhodey will take you on a journey with some of her friends as they share their experiences and testimonies from their walk with Christ. You'll see that you are not alone in your search for God, your victories with Him, or your failures. Welcome to On the Road with Jesus. Now, here's your host, Rhodey Fisher.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. Let's pray. Father, we just love you so much. We bless you. We honor you. Lord, be with our listeners and those that are here. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you guys for listening again. We are in Psalm 134, and I pray, Lord, that you would give us understanding of your word. So here, I'm reading out of the New King James, and it goes, "Behold, bless the Lord, all you servants of the Lord, who by night stand in the house of the Lord. Lift up your hands in the sanctuary and bless the Lord who made heaven and earth. Bless you from Zion." Wow. Just 3 little verses speak so much. I remember when I first prayed for the first time. I mean, people have heard this testimony many times, but I grew up in a Christian home. I was inches away from becoming what I thought was a Hindu. I was in college studying all this stuff about different religions, and I thought Hindu's the way to go. And so here I was in the hospital dying of cancer, given 3 to 6 months to live. I was in 3rd or 4th stage Hodgkin's disease, which is cancer of the lymph glands. And this was right before my 3rd operation. It was just me and who I was calling on, this particular God. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to become a Hindu is they worship 3.5 million gods. And I thought, surely I'll bound to pray on the right God. And so I prayed for the first time where I wasn't being asked to pray by my parents or someone else. You know, someone else would come up to you. When you grow up in a church, you know that people will come up to you and say, "Pray for me, I haven't been feeling well." And so at this point in my life, I was 23, dying. And I said, all I could think of was, who's going to take care of my babies? And I wanted the Lord to find maybe a new wife for my husband, maybe a great nanny for my husband. And I said, God, the one that created the heavens and the earth, that God, find someone to take care of my kids. And at that, I was ready to die. I kept thinking, I'm going to do this 3rd operation. It's not going to improve my health. It's just they're going to take out lymph glands that were sticking out of my, different places that were uncomfortable. And so it wasn't going to prolong my life. But when I prayed that prayer, the God who created the heavens and the earth answered me. I felt like there was a warm blanket that was put on me. And I woke up, opened my eyes to say to the nurse, "Thank you." And there was no one in my room. And I remember thinking, wow, that was really weird. The weirdest thing happened to me. God put a blanket on me. And I closed my eyes and went to sleep, ready for the surgery the next day. And lo and behold, there was no cancer there when it was there the day before. So you tell me the God that created the heavens and the earth was a big enough God to do that. He came down and touched my life. When I read this, I think of that. The Lord who made heaven and earth. Bless you from Zion. Thank you for joining us this morning. I would like to introduce again my speaker, Lori Bryant. As a reminder, I met Lori. I'm not sure when, but earlier this year in January, I started attending a Women's of Worth ministry. This is women that have lost their husbands. and at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills. At one of those times, I met Lori and I asked her to be on my show. And welcome, Lori.
Thank
Bryant.
you.
Wow. So for some of you, you've heard her testimony and on a previous show, the one right before this. Others of you, you might have been joining us for the first time ever, and we'll hear the second half of her testimony or parts of her testimony. Women of worth are women that have lost their husband. Many of you know that I've remarried, and Mark and I have been married for 28 years, but I still qualify because I lost my previous husband. And so I can attend this meeting, which is so good for healing for those of you that might have lost a spouse, especially during this COVID time.
Yes.
But welcome, Lori, and we will start again. I'd like for you to share your testimony for those that haven't heard it. And we'll start there.
Okay. So we talked a lot about it, the whole hour, in fact, right? Grew up in Ontario, California in the early 60s and 70s and had a pretty suburban, life back then. And if anybody's ever watched The Wonder Years, right? Like that really is kind of how it went. And so, but generational alcoholism and not a real functioning Christian home, lots of, things to deal with over those years, married at 17, divorced by the time I was 20, had a daughter with a lot of medical issues, went through a lot. And anyway, gave my life to Jesus at about 11 in a release time trailer out in a school parking lot, and found out that you have a, connection to that and have for many, many years. And then from there, progressed with my daughter who was very sick, met my husband when she was 2 and wasn't dating, didn't want to get married, thought I had ruined my life. In fact, a really interesting thing for many of you, either in the past or now, may feel like you've made choices that have ruined your life completely. And at 21, 22, that's how I felt. I remember even thinking like, I'll never have the life that I wanted. I'll never have, the marriage and the family. And for some reason, I thought the white picket fence, which I don't even know, I guess that's kind of like a sign of,
you made it.
Sure. But for some reason, that was in my mind at that time as well. And then, Bob and I met when Melissa was 2, became friends. And then eventually we married when she was 6. At that time, right after we got married, he gave his life to the Lord as well. And not only had he always been the kindest, nicest, most generous man I'd ever met, now he became a passionate Christian. And so our life went on the fast track at that point with ministry and youth group and every single thing you could do, right, to, be around church and learn more about the Lord. And then I guess, all up and really until COVID began. And so that's where...
Now, at the time that COVID began, you guys were really knee-deep in ministry. And your ministry had changed from being a youth pastor to the different areas that they were putting you in, which really widened your scope of ministry. Tell us a little bit about that before you talk about the COVID thing.
Well, it's even a unique way that we came into ministry, right? Because I was working, managing dental offices, and Bob was a truck driver. And he had been a long-haul truck driver when we met and married, and now he was a local driver and a manager at a large, truck driving place. And so the pastor came to us one day. We had volunteered with youth for many, many years. And pastor came to us one day and said he had been on a, summer leave. And when he came back, he needed to hire a new youth pastor. And it was a large church and a pretty large youth group and growing. And he said, the only faces I saw the whole time I was gone was the 2 of you. I don't even know if we can make this work, right? But I feel like we're supposed to. And so we laugh and look back and say, we jumped off a cliff. We just cashed in the 401 and changed our lifestyle and took another track. And we never looked back. And to this day, I'm so grateful that we did. And so, from that point, we kind of aged out, if you will, aged out of youth ministry for the common person. But Bob and I at that time were like, we pictured ourselves, in walkers and wheelchairs and canes with youth for the rest of our life. Bob never felt like this is a step towards becoming a real pastor, right? He was like this. He would tell people, and they would say, oh yeah, I'm the pastor over the youth, and they would say, oh, I'm glad it's not me, and he would think, me too, because this is the best job in the church, right? He would say, this is the best job in the church. And so we just have always gravitated towards and loved youth. And then at one point they really made the decision for us and said, it's time that we're going to move you guys into other ministries. And so for a while, they moved him, they bounced him around. He went, to urban outreaches and benevolence and, stewarding money and all these different kinds of ministries until he landed in prayer ministry and healing ministry, and a big part of a department that we call healing and caring. So that's like the crisis, the funerals, the counseling, anything that goes on that where people are struggling and having a hard time, all the way into like the prayer tower, intercessor's prayer, and all the equipping that has to do with that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So tell us, I sadly want to tell you to go back to what was going on in your lives right before your husband got COVID.
Yes.
And I know that it'll bring some tears, and even for me, but tell us a little bit about what was going on with the church and in your lives right before he got sick.
Well, so, in a marriage, now we were up to now in our 32nd year of marriage, right?
Wow.
So a lot of life had been lived now. And
Exactly.
we had raised our 4 children and 1 foster. They were all to the age where they were, getting married and moving out. And so we had 1 son still in the home that was getting ready to go to North Carolina to college. We were ready to become empty nesters. We had really felt like for the maybe 5 years before that, already that stage in your marriage where you already feel like an empty nester, right? Your kids are busy. They don't need you to be there all the time. And so he and I had decided, right? Marriages will reach that stage where you no longer are just co-parents anymore. That felt like your whole world, right?
Mhm.
And now we, at one point, had talked to each other and said, it's time to look at who are we without children? Like, what do we still have in common? And what do we do? And like, how do we recreate our marriage right now? Right. And we knew it was something that needed to be intentional because I was in my own outside speaking ministries, writing ministries, and he was deep in the healing ministries. And at some point, some of those ministries we partnered together with. But we were pretty separate at that time in ministry, not like we had been all our lives in youth ministry. And so Bob comes home, probably a little bit even before this time. He drives up one day in a red convertible.
Yes.
And I lose my mind. I'm thinking, you turned in your truck and you are getting a red convertible? I said, have you lost your mind, Bob? Are you going through a midlife crisis? And he laughed and he said, yes, I am, Lori. I said, there's no room in that car for our kids. And he said, exactly. Right. And so then he said, but there's a seat for you. Right.
Yeah.
There's a seat for you. And at the time, I kind of pushed back a little bit on it. And then what ended up happening is that red convertible just took our marriage to a whole new level. We would literally get in that car and drive to the beach after, a day of work. We would go to Palm Springs for a night, go to Huntington for a night. It was fabulous. And so our kids started to get kind of, especially one of our kids, she was like, something's wrong with mom and dad. Like, I don't know what's going on. They're up to something. And like, she holds a little, family meeting with my kids and her brothers. And so, one of them said, I think they're just having fun. She's like, no, they're up to something. And so, so that season of life, right? We were way more free. And, so it just seemed like a good season. And, then up comes, through 2019. And like I said, we're getting ready to send 1 son off to college. And the church had decided after 20 full-time staff years that they were going to send us on a 12-week sabbatical. And so that sabbatical was going to start the 3rd week of January 2020. Little did we know what was about to happen, right? And so Bob had been working for so long. I told our senior pastor one day, Pastor Dan, I think that Bob's freaking out about his sabbatical. He's so stressed out. And he started laughing. And I said, So he ends up talking to him and, telling him, Bob was afraid to be away from the people. We had been away for 1, maybe 2 weeks at a time for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so here we're going to be away for, 12 weeks. And so I told Bob right away. So I was telling him, okay, you're going to be off on, he did this prayer and worship night on, I think the 24th of January. Well, the 26th, I booked us on a cruise. And he's like, Lori, we don't even get a time to like stay at home and rest. I said, no, we live 2 blocks from the church. You're not going to disconnect. We got to disconnect right away. And we had talked to some other people that had taken sabbaticals. And this is one of the key things that they told us. Connect soon because this time's going to go fast. Right. And so I told him, I go, Bob, here's what I've booked. I booked a week-long cruise. Then as soon as we get home, we're going to take a 3-week road trip and we're going to go to our grandson's birthday. And then all this family that he hadn't seen for a while, or that we really didn't have the time to spend a lot of quality time with them. So he started picking the people, his brother, his sister, my uncle, places he wanted to go and really spend longer times with people than we were used to. And so we took this, ended up being almost 4-week road trip. And then some friends of ours had gifted us with a pastor's retreat in Maui. And so literally we came home for 1 week. And then the very beginning of March, we left for Maui. And it was...
So let me back up a
Go
minute.
ahead.
You go on this week-long cruise first.
Yes.
And then you go on this 4-week road trip.
Yes.
And then on this road trip, somebody gifts you a trip to Maui.
Yes.
Okay. Wow.
Right?
Yeah,
so this is a good
perfect.
sabbatical so far, right?
Gosh, so far, so good.
And now Bob was saying, no, we should have stayed home and, decompressed for a few weeks before we got this busy. And looking back, we wouldn't have done anything if we hadn't have done it right away, right?
Right.
So now, right, now he's really loving life, right? We are just, a really interesting thing that he said was, I had an uncle that had a stroke, and he was quite sick, and he was in his mid-80s. And that was Bob's favorite uncle. And this is my mom's sister's husband. And when we left, he was quiet. And I said, why are you so quiet? And he said, Lori, I feel like that's the last time I'm going to see Uncle Bob.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, Bob, he said, I know, I never feel like this. Like I would never say that. But I think it's the last time I'm going to see Uncle Bob. And little did we know that I just saw my Uncle Bob 2 weeks ago for a cousin's wedding. And it was Bob that wasn't going to be here.
Yeah.
And so then we took this trip and we get this, we had no idea when we left for Maui how wonderful this time was going to be, right? So we go to Maui, and it's a pastor's retreat, but it's a house and it's a couple. And they just serve and host and love and minister to one couple at a time. And so our friends, Kathy and Stuart Greer, that are pastors and missionaries out in now in the San Diego County, they were the ones that made this connection for us. And so these people, we fell in love with them, right? We pulled up to their house, and we're looking at this home in Maui that's like, looks like like an old Victorian, beautiful home. And now Bob and I had been in a major car accident together, and had so much damage to our bodies just a couple of years before this. And Bob had never fully recovered all of he tore ligaments, and, just was kind of a lot of pain all the time. And here he is walking up these stairs. He never talked about his pain, but he's walking up these stairs, and the man that was doing the retreat noticed it. And when we got all the way up the stairs, he said, hi, I'm Bud, and welcome to our home, and started to explain a little bit. And he said, Pastor Bob, I watched you walk up those stairs. And he said, I have something for you. He said, I have a walking stick ministry. And I'm just thinking, what the heck, right? We just walked in their house, and he said, come over here and pick a walking stick. I make these, I pray over them, and then the Lord shows me who to give them to.
Wow.
And he gives Bob this walking stick. But what he didn't know is Bob loved the ocean and loved the beach. And ever since our car accident, he felt so unstable that he was embarrassed that if he got in the water, he might not get back out, or he might fall. So he just didn't go in anymore. And later I told Bud, I said, that walking stick not only allowed Bob to go into the water in Hawaii the whole time we were there, he would hold on to me, and he would hold on to that walking stick. and he would go in and out of the ocean over and over. And he used it when we got back home as well.
Wow.
So this
How
is
precious is
right,
God?
tangible care of the Lord,
Oh
right?
my
In
gosh,
Bob's life.
yes, yes.
And so, but that was just, the half of what happened in Maui. And
So
so,
you get to Maui and you're being blessed by this couple,
yes.
and they just are serving you guys to the max.
Oh, they won't even let us take our coffee cup back to the kitchen.
Mm.
Yeah, it was wonderful. That was their ministry. And so, and then you do that for a week. And then the next week they put you in their condo in Kihei, which is right by the ocean. But now they say rent a car and become a tourist and enjoy your last week here as a tourist, right? Just do whatever you want. And they let you use their condo. And so while we were in the condo, right? And now you're talking like, around the 7th is a week out of the retreat house. And now our kids start talking to us. The news is starting to show COVID, COVID, COVID. Now my daughter's saying, Mom, people are fighting at Costco over toilet paper and the shelves are empty and it's getting crazy here. And you guys need to come home. And nothing's happening in Maui. Right?
Mm-hmm.
We're literally like, okay, instead of taking pineapples home to people this time, we're going to take toilet paper, right? Because it seems like nothing.
Yeah.
So we're sitting the night before we were supposed to come home, and it was right. Things were getting, now it's like maybe the 10th, and they're telling us the schools are going to shut down on the 13th.
Mm-hmm.
And we're sitting on this hill. Seriously, we're just watching the whales, we just got in this peaceful place after these, 4 or 5 weeks. And we're sitting there watching the whales. And I look at Bob and I say, honey, people are canceling their Airbnbs. They're canceling their flights. Right. This island is even kind of going to start getting deserted because travelers can't come here. And I said, I'm looking at Airbnbs and I found one right on the ocean in Sugar Beach for $100 a night. Let's stay another week. And he's like, stay another week. We got to go home. And I just laughed and I said, why do we have to go home? And all of a sudden, as soon as he said yes, I just boom, 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 booked everything. And what we did then is we spent our 3rd week and we went over to Sugar Beach and we checked into this place. And it literally, he said, oh my gosh, I'm never leaving, right? We did a week of sabbatical, a week of tourist. And he said, Lori, I'm either going to have my trunks or my pajama bottoms on. I'm never leaving this house. And he said, look at this place. And this is how he said it. He goes, there's 10 feet of golf grass and then 10 feet of sand, and we're in the ocean.
Wow.
And we literally stayed in that house for the next week. And so it was like this gift upon gift upon gift from the Lord. And then when we flew back, we realized right away, this is not even what we thought, because we got into LAX and it was deserted. Right? We drove home that night and there was nobody on the 101 or the 5 or the 605. And you're like, what has happened to, So when we got home, he still had a few weeks of sabbatical left. And even the offices in church had said, we don't even know what we're doing around here, Bob. Don't come back. The Lord knew when your sabbatical was, stay home. And then from there, everyone had been sent home out of the offices, and like people were being at that time we were just talking about this, right? It was like, how do they shut down major sporting events and government offices and casinos? And you're thinking like things that you think would never shut down. It's hard to remember back then, like schools were shutting down, and at that time they were like just panic and fear, and they thought you got COVID by touching the counters, and remember the grocery stores,
right?
And all of those things, and things that was like we were all living in a sci-fi movie.
Exactly. That's exactly what it was. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was really the unknown, and people were, even Christians were so fearful.
Well, think of it. Nobody had ever experienced anything like this.
Exactly.
Nothing like this. The doctors didn't even know what was happening with COVID. And then, of course, as time has gone by, I mean, let's just say they still probably don't, right? We'll look back later and see all kinds of things. But so anyway, as far as our part of this journey of, pandemic and COVID is Water of Life Church. Our church had chosen to do kind of a hybrid model where our pastor was like, if you're sick, if you're, high risk, if you're all these things, by all means, get online. And all churches started developing some kind of a form of, I think pastors probably had it worse. I thought teachers did. But I think senior pastors really did. Because if they shut down, people said they were full of fear. If they stayed open, people said that they were reckless with their people. If they didn't shake a hand, you didn't have any faith. If you did shake a hand, you were endangering people. Like, it was just crazy, right? And so I think every senior pastor had to make decisions based on their own, right, convictions and their people. They knew their bodies and stuff too, and who they're called to be. And so we have so many pastors that they had decided that Bob would stay an online pastor. And he really was a pastor of prayer anyway. So he was having prayer appointments on the phone, and he was the online Sunday pastor. And so for that next year, I look back and didn't realize what God was doing for me, right? I look back and think, he gave me a whole entire year with Bob 24/7.
Yeah.
Right. And so normally Bob would work 50, 60 hours a week. And here we were in our house. We have a little office in the garage. I would sit out there and drink coffee in the morning. We would get on all of his meetings together. I would just sit in on his meetings, and we would do some counseling together with people and swim in the pool at lunchtime and have our grandson over. And, I look back and think, when in our life did we ever do this?
And to start out with that wonderful vacation of 8 weeks.
Oh, 12. Set the tone for everything.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah.
12 weeks.
So we were already like, we were living Maui
mode.
style for the next year, right?
What a gift from the Lord, though. What a treasure. And to look back at that is just enormous.
And because we're prayer pastors, healing pastors, counseling pastors, so now what started to happen right now, we're into like June. And if you remember, people were saying, oh, do you even know one person that had COVID? Like online people would say, do you know one person that has COVID? Like, do you know one person who died of COVID? And nobody did at that time, or rarely.
Yeah.
Right. And so then it started changing. And now, because we're such a large church, just over and over, people are sick. People are very sick. Now we know people that died. Now we know people, right, that were in the hospital on ventilators and came off. Now we're starting to know personally, right? Not just statistically or, whatever people were talking about. And now we have several people in that summer. So it was like June, July, August, when I guess there was a spike again around, I think it was like 4th of July.
Yeah.
But now we're doing lots of ministry. In fact, healing rooms shut down. And we said, how can we shut down healing ministry in this? People need it more than ever. So we came up with a drive-through healing rooms.
Wow.
And one of our campuses has a huge circular driveway around the property. And we just figured out how to get people to drive in, right? Let us know what their needs were. They would go to a parking space, and our teams would come up around the car, being as safe as they could and praying for people.
Wow.
And so, never in a million years, right? Thinking you're going to do these kinds of things, figuring out how to do ministry in the middle of this, right? As Christians, we don't retreat from these kinds of things. And so figuring out, God, how do you want us to do this? And so now Bob did have, he was a low-level diabetic, so he took 1 metformin a day, and he did have hypertension. And so we knew he has a little more high risk than some people, but Bob's philosophy had always been that he would say, in our 30s even, this used to freak me out when he would say this, and he would say, Lori, we really are invincible until the day the Lord calls us home. And he'd say, now, I don't mean stupid. He said, if I stepped down in front of a bus, that would be dumb. I would probably live the rest of my life paralyzed. But he said that when the Lord calls me home, nobody's going to keep me here. And he told me one time, not even you, Lori. And I'm like, okay, that's enough, right? We're like 32 or 33. We have little babies. I'm like, Bob, that's freaking me out. And he said, no, but it's real. He had been reading through the scriptures, and he had been seeing how our days were allotted to us. And it was really not a morbid thing, but he was saying we got to make the most of every single day.
Yeah.
Right? We don't know how much time we have.
You really mentioned a really excellent point, because I've had 3 friends who have lost their husbands due to COVID.
Yeah.
And I have one friend, I won't mention her name, you don't know her, but beating herself up because she didn't get a particular medicine to him in time.
Sure.
And I said, his time was allotted. And I think that message needs to be clear. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's COVID or not COVID, or like you say, if you stepped out in front of the bus, you'd probably, if it's not your time, you'd be living yourself, as a paraplegic or possibly for the rest of your life.
Sure.
God
So he
has
wasn't talking about reckless and dumb,
reckless, exactly.
right? Wisdom, but to know this day, the next one's not promised to you.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so at that time, even like talking about these kinds of things, one of the things that COVID has done and heightened, right? I've gone through now grief share and led people. I've actually met with 27 new widows since I was widowed personally to start walking them through their grief journey. And I will tell you, every single one, whether it was COVID or not, but especially COVID, says something like, I should have taken him to the hospital sooner. I shouldn't have taken him to the hospital at all. They killed him, right? I should have, whatever. I should have put him on this medication. I shouldn't have let them give him this medication. We should have done this. We should have, like, it's just so much. And whether it's even like, say, some of the women, their husbands had heart attacks. I should have made him go to the doctor, right? I shouldn't have driven him myself. I should have called the ambulance. The enemy's tactics always for us are to torment us, right? He really doesn't ever do anything new. And he's just been having such a heyday in COVID, right? Because he doesn't do anything new. It says he kills, steals, and destroys. And the tactics that he uses are accusation and lies and torment, right? Just getting us to even question what we've done or what God's done, right? And so in COVID, especially working with COVID widows, this is what I've seen, right? I had it myself, and I had to just finally say enough, right? Someone walked up to me one day that hadn't seen me months after Bob had died, and they said, "Oh my God, Lori, I can't believe that COVID took Bob." And she was trying to hug me. And I remember all of a sudden I kind of backed away a little and I said, COVID did not take my husband. We're all going to die of something. God took Bob, and Bob was God's friend. And all of a sudden I had the revelation myself. Nobody loved Bob more than God, not even me.
Right. And
And that my worst day of my life when he left this earth was his very best day ever. And the grief is real, the pain is there, the process is hard, but it is truly a pain like I had never experienced. But the closeness of God, the reality of where Bob was, and the only thing I could feel is, I just want to be there with you, right? And it's been a year and a half of realizing that's not God's plan. And I don't want to get to heaven and Bob and God both have their arms crossed, looking at me like, why didn't you fulfill the rest of your destiny, right? It's short, but there's a plan. And so this process of grief and hope and destiny and journey and, what's our part still, I think just becomes a day-to-day struggle. And it's really God that just walks us through the day by day of it all. And so for someone like your friend, when I'm walking with them, it really is to get to this point that, do you think that you are bigger than God? Right? And it's the enemy. We got to break off the lies. We got to repent from listening to that liar. And then we have to walk in the truth, even in the pain. And I've experienced some of the pain, like I thought I'd been through pain in my life, right? Car accidents and divorces and all this craziness in life, and nothing compared to losing my spouse of, almost 40 years together.
Take us back to prior to him getting COVID. You're living this life, you're in this really good place. You're now at home, still doing ministry, on the phone, on the computer, and having drive-through healing rooms. How does he get sick, and when does he get sick through all of this?
So we were coming up on November of that year, November 2020. And so Bob and I had a couple of weeks of timeshare, right? So every year we would go, the week of our birthdays, we would go to Dana Point to the beach. And then we would take that other week somewhere else, during the year. And so it was coming up, and our birthdays were 2 weeks apart. And so his was November 26th, mine's December 12th, and we would take that week in between our birthdays after Thanksgiving. And this year, the November is coming up, and he tells me, "Did you book our birthday week already?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "I'm thinking we should go the first part of November instead of the last of November," which we had never done. And so I said, "Do you have something planned?" Like, I was thinking maybe the church had something that he had to do. He said, "No, I just feel like I want to do it earlier." And so I just said, "Yeah, let me check." And so ended up getting the dates more like the somewhere around the 4th of, November. And this was a condo out in Dana Point that has a balcony that looks at the ocean, and kind of like that Hawaii place. We knew when we got in that place, had a kitchen, right? We were just self-sufficient. There's a balcony you can sit on, little footbridge you could walk over PCH and be on the beach. And so we ended up booking that. And so he came home on the Friday, a week. We were there for a week together. Our daughter had come up with her son, and Kathy and Stuart, the ones who had gotten us the Maui condo, they came up one night, and we had dinner in the condo.
Now, this is still 2020.
This is 2020. This is November. Mm-hmm. And so we came home, and he came home the night before I did. And so Sunday, when I was home with him, we were supposed to go to a football game at my daughter's house with her and her husband. And so Bob said to me, "I don't think that I should go, Lori. I don't feel well." And I thought that was weird, and he said, "I just think I need to be careful." And so I said, "Okay." And he said, "Why don't you go?" So I ended up going over there just for a little bit. And I thought, I don't want to leave your dad alone. So I got a plate of food for him and came back home. And that night he had like 100.3 fever. But he said, "I need to call HR." And they had protocol about when you're sick as an employee or whatever. He said, "I'm going to have to get a COVID test to go back." But he said, "I just need to call HR," because he was supposed to do this online or in-person 5:30 prayer. And he said, "I don't think I should go to it. I need to call Dawn." So he called and let them know. And she said, "Yeah, get a COVID test this week. And, when you're symptom free, get another one." So anyways, the protocol of back then, and I know it's changed all the time, but so I was already getting prepared that Monday to go get a COVID test because I was going to go visit my grandchildren. And my daughter and her husband work in a hospital. So whenever I would come and visit the grandchildren, they would get tested. I would get tested because they were like, "We work in a hospital. We don't want to give you COVID." Mm-hmm. And so we just standardly did that. And so I was going to take a COVID test on Monday, and I said, "Well, come with me." And so Monday, he still wasn't feeling well. And we went in and took a COVID test. And that day, it was so weird. We drove home in the same car, right? And he said, "I think you should sleep in the guest room." And I thought, this is getting weird, Bob. Like, you've had the flu before and I've slept in your bed. Like, we don't separate. Like, what are you doing? And I think that he was already starting to think this is different. Mm-hmm. And so I said, "Okay." And I slept in the guest bedroom, and he texted me in the middle of the night, and he said, "Pray for me. I'm positive." And I sat up, and I'm shocked, right? And I pull up my own test, and it says positive, and I have no symptom at all. And so I get up out of bed, and I walk in the room, and he's sitting on our couch in our bedroom, and he said, "Lori, don't come in here. I have COVID." I said, "Bob." And I sit down next to him, and he's like, "Honey." And then I hold up my phone. And when he sees my positive, he starts crying. Oh. And he says, "I didn't want you to get sick." Mm-hmm. And so I said, "It's okay. We'll quarantine together and take care of each other." Right. And then the next day he got sicker. Right. And then he had all these flu symptoms. And then he got the body aches and the headaches and the cough. And then he started getting weak, and then he couldn't eat, and he couldn't keep anything down. And one day at a time, it was getting worse, and I still had nothing. And so now I'm calling the doctors. I'm trying to do what they say. At that point, I don't think anybody knew what to do with anybody, right? They didn't want him to even come into the hospital.
Right.
And so by the 6th day, I called the nurse hotline again, and I said, "I need to talk to a doctor. He's not okay." And so the doctor told him, "Get up and walk across the room a couple of times and keep talking." And he wasn't winded or out of breath, right? And he said, okay, you're probably dehydrated. So we're thinking, at that time, he said, you might need a breathing treatment, might need some hydration, and you probably need a Z-Pack and go to the emergency room. Well, Bob didn't feel, horrible, horrible. So he's like, I have to charge my phone. I need to change my clothes. I need to, do all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll go as soon as you're ready. And because he had fallen that morning, he was so weak. I told my son, help him down the stairs. And Bob was like, I don't need help down the stairs. So he's telling me, don't go to Kaiser Fontana, go to Kaiser, Ontario. I know people there. And, he still was just like, he was irritated, I think, that he had to go to the emergency room. But so now we get to the emergency room, and this is going to be my first big awakening of what's happening at the hospitals, because now the spike is happening and it's getting bad. And I pull up to the emergency room, and they make you let the patient out, and then you go park, and they put them outside in a COVID area, which was just a roped off area on the sidewalk with chairs and wheelchairs and stuff. No covering, nothing around it. And I put Bob out there, and I'm like, I'm trying to stay in there. And the nurse keeps telling me, you need to leave this area. You need to stay in your car and leave this area. And I'm telling her, I have COVID too. Like, I'm not going to get more COVID. I'm not going to, why? And finally, she just kind of didn't know what to say. And she said, it's just our policy. Well, and then Bob tells me, I'm freezing, Lori, and they can't bring them blankets. And she said, we can't bring you a blanket until you're inside. Right? All these patients out here on the sidewalk have no blankets. And so
this is November.
Actually, this is November 23rd. So we are the week of Thanksgiving now, right? We were sick at home for a week. And then now this is going into the second week. And so I go to my car because, moms, grandmas, always there's a baby blanket or a beach towel or a, something in my car. And I, go through my car, and I have nothing, no jackets, nothing. And so I tell Bob, I'm going to Walgreens. I'm going to go buy you a blanket. Like, it would take me more time to go home or to get someone to come here and bring a blanket. And so I rush over to the store, and I'm kind of frantic now, right? And I'm just like, I just want to get back there. And they have several blankets on the shelf, and I just grab them all. And I go to the register, and the manager is kind of watching me. And he comes up, and he looks at me, and he says, what are you doing? And I said, my husband has COVID, and they are having to put them out on the sidewalk, and he's freezing, but so are everyone else is too. So there's some elderly ladies out there that are freezing, and I'm buying blankets for everyone. And this manager tears up, and he tells the cash register, the lady at the cash register, he says, give her 70% off of everything. He said, if she's doing this while her husband is sick, I want a piece of that.
Wow.
And I just start bawling, right? I just lose it and grab all these blankets and head back to the hospital. And so I cover up Bob. I give all the blankets away. And at that point, I literally am thinking, I need my friends to bring more blankets. Like, people are just coming now. There's probably, when we first got there, a handful of people. Well, as the days kind of progressing, there's just more and more. And so finally, I keep going in and out of where Bob is. And I know the nurse is kind of looking the other way, because she really does think this woman has COVID. Like, what am I even thinking? And so I went over to talk to him again. And at this point, he looks at me and he says, Lori, I'm in trouble. And my heart just sank, right? I'm like, no, we're at the hospital. You're doing great. You're not in trouble.
Yeah.
And I called my friend that's a nurse there, and I said, April, Bob never complains about anything, right? Something's wrong. I said, he needs to be checked. And she said, let me call the charge nurse, and I'm going to get him reassessed. And they called the charge nurse, and she came out, and when they took him back in, they didn't bring him back out. And his numbers were dropping. His oxygen level was going down. I still thought, okay, he's going to get that breathing treatment. He's going to get that hydration. He's going to get what he needs. The next thing I know, this nurse just runs out the door, and she's waving me over. Like, literally, she doesn't say anything. She's just like waving me on, like, follow me. And she's kind of jogging. She's not walking, or she's not even walking fast. And I run behind her.
And she takes me into the room where he is. And, his chest is just caving in. And the doctor is there and looks at the nurse like, what are you doing bringing her in here? And she says to him, doctor, this isn't just anyone that you're getting ready to intubate. This is Pastor Bob, and this is his wife. And the doctor tells the nurses, all right, you know what to do. And they laid their hands on him and they prayed for him for like 30 seconds.
Wow.
And then the doctor said, okay, kiss him. You need to get out of the room. He told the nurse, get her out of here. And Bob was not panicked at all. It's so weird. Like, I've seen people who are having trouble breathing, right? And they're panic stricken. Or if you ever think you can't breathe, you just, and he wasn't. He was trying to talk to me and he was looking at me and he said, tell everyone I love them and I'll see you when I wake up. And that was the last words I ever heard from him. And so then out to the parking lot. Now this nurse had realized, because April had called in, this nurse had realized, like, thank you.
It's fresh.
That's okay. This nurse had realized who we were and what was happening with us. And when she saw me giving out the blankets, and now all of a sudden she's putting all these pieces together, and she just became so helpful and so kind. And she said, when we get him stable in about an hour, we're going to come and get you. And I'll let you go back in. And I'm like calling. Now, I hadn't even called my kids. I didn't call my mom. I didn't call anybody because I thought I'm going to wait till we get out and back home and tell them that he had a breathing treatment, or got an IV or something. And now I'm having to call everybody. And so I call my kids, I call my friends, I call our senior pastor, and just like, now we need people praying, but I'm going to get to go see him in an hour. And because I have COVID, people can't come around me, right? One of my friends could come down because she had just gotten over COVID, and one of my sons had COVID. And so here we were in the parking lot, but we were waiting hours and hours, and it was like 2 a.m, and they still weren't calling me. I kept calling in. Do I have any update yet? Do I have an update yet? And next thing I know, 2 a.m, the doctor calls me and he says, I'm really sorry, but your husband has had a silent heart attack. His oxygen dropped so low, so fast, and we couldn't get him to recover quickly. And he probably won't make it through the night. Oh. And that's literally how fast it went. Like, he's charging his phone and grumbling about going in because he thinks he's fine and knows he's sick, but, doesn't think he's like this deadly sick. And so I just dropped to the ground in the parking lot and I just told my friend, get everybody praying, like, get everyone we know praying. And so that became a 8-day journey of really just sitting in the parking lot and praying for Bob.
So he was there another 8 days.
He was there another 7 days. He actually was there for that week, and people would drive by. People were praying. People were sending food. People were coming by. Now the blanket thing started because here you are in the parking lot, right? And at first you're just so focused on your own loved one, but all of a sudden we're not leaving from like 10 a.m. till 2 and the next morning. We're there all day, half the night, going home barely to sleep. It's like a nightmare. And you can't get in. But now all of a sudden I'm seeing I'm not alone out here, right? There are dozens and dozens of people, became hundreds eventually, in these parking lots, sitting in their cars, doing the same thing I'm doing, right? Or coming and going. And we started realizing all these patients out here on the sidewalk, every day the numbers were growing. And I couldn't do anything, right? I'm like, there's nothing I can do for Bob. And I started to think, okay, but we can do something for someone else. And we started giving the blankets out. And as soon as I started calling the church and calling my friends, people were dropping off blankets until my garage was filling up. And then little teams of people started delivering the blankets. And then we started making snack bags, and we were praying for people and talking to people. And this whole 8 days, around the clock, this became this giant ministry in the parking lot at Kaiser, Ontario.
Wow. What a beautiful thought. Here you are suffering yourself, but God opens the door for you to minister to those that are suffering with you.
Well, and the connection that you make in those situations, and I've told the story before because it just stood out so much to me, is that, we would knock on windows and people would be a little afraid at night or whatever and roll their window down a little or think you're trying to sell them something. And then we would just say, we know it's hard to be out here. Who's your loved one that's in there? Can we pray for them? And 99.9% of the time, right, whether they had faith or not, they would say yes. And then some of them, taking the snack bags and the blankets or whatever. But one night, really, really late in the night, I saw this car parked in a handicapped spot, and it was an older man, very elderly gentleman. And I walked over and knocked on his window, and same thing, he rolled it down a tiny bit. And I said, "I'm so sorry that you're sitting out here. I know that that means someone that you love is in that hospital and you can't get in there. And I'm in the same position, right? I was wondering if I could pray with you." And he starts sobbing and he rolls his window down and he says, "Honey, my bride of 60 some years is in there and I don't know what's happening to her. And do you see anybody with me?" "No." And I said, "Hold on, I'm going to go get my chair." We had like camp chairs and stuff, right? We made a whole camp out there. "And I'm going to go get my chair and I'm going to come over and sit here and be with you." And I end up sitting there for hours with him, just talking and praying and hearing about their whole life, their love story, and all of these things. And there's just something special, right? Whether it's you hear about people in combat or concentration camps or, whatever the tragedy is, that you're in it together.
Yeah.
And there's a commonality now that creates an intimacy and an openness really to God.
Beautiful. Now, the ministry goes on. I don't want to minimize the fact that, okay, so Bob passed away. Lord takes him home.
Yes.
8 days in the hospital.
Yeah. So that week in the hospital right now, it's Thanksgiving, right? It's Thanksgiving. It's Bob's birthday, right? And this is the week that my family and I are having out there in the hospital. We had a little birthday party, right? Thanksgiving, it just was like every day, because Bob was the director of the healing rooms and he was a man more full of faith than any man that I really knew.
Mm-hmm.
I just kept believing God's going to do something with him, right? It really kind of an odd thought, but like if he's going to heal anyone, he is going to heal Bob Bryant, right? And so he's going to come out of this hospital with the best story we've ever heard. And so on that last day, the Lord had woken me up early in the morning. I felt an urge to get back to the hospital way earlier than we had been going there. And when I got to the hospital, I was sitting there and I was just thinking, okay, why am I here, Lord? Right? I'm here so early. And so I just started to pray. I didn't know. And so then maybe 20 minutes later, the hospital calls me and I looked at my phone and I knew they don't call me at this time. And I answered, and there's the doctor that I'd been talking to now for a whole week, right? Every day. And she said, "Lori, I'm so sorry. Bob is in code blue and they're trying to resuscitate him." And I had the phone in my hand and I said, I'm going to come up there. I'm here right now. I'm coming. And at first she was like, no, you're not going to make it. You can't. And I said, "No, I'm in the parking lot. I'm coming in now." And I was got out of my car. It was unlocked. I left my purse in there. I had my phone on speakerphone. I ran past the security and the entrance and they called security on me. And I realized in so many families, I didn't even know where his room was, right? I knew from the outside of the building because they had put a heart on his window. But once I got inside the hospital, I'm thinking, okay, where's north? I know we're on the north side of I didn't know what elevator to take. I didn't know where I was going. But now I'm on speakerphone with the doctor and the security guards tried to stop me and I pushed past them and told them no, right? This man who has given his whole life to everybody else on this planet isn't going to die right now alone. And I need to be in that room and somehow maybe being closer to him, right? We know that's not even, theologically correct, that God doesn't need us to be closer to the person we're praying for. But it felt like that, like I'm getting in that room no matter what. And I told the security guard, "I'm sorry, but you're going to have to throw me to the ground and arrest me." And this poor young kid, right? He's probably in his 20s. You could tell he just is at a loss. He doesn't know what to do right now. And the doctor starts now saying, give him the phone, Lori, give him the phone. And so I gave him the phone, and she said, she's 10 days post positive test, asymptomatic. She's clear. Let her go up there. And I imagine for many of your listeners listening right now that so many people, their loved ones died without them, or they died on FaceTime, or they never got in.
Yeah.
Right? I'm dealing right now in ministry with so much trauma from people that just feel like I just needed to be by their bedside. I just wanted to say goodbye.
Yeah.
Right? It's like almost like it's not even a reality. I think of all of COVID, and I think of the separation and the hatred and the division, and all these people had all their positions. But the inhumanity of it was the separation of families with their sick and dying loved ones.
Yeah.
That is not even humane, right? That's nothing should ever stop that. And so you look back, and I know they had all the reasons why they thought they should. But I think that a lot of the trauma of families, and I think of my children and so many others, is they felt like we didn't even get to see dad.
Yeah.
Right? One day, he's here and joking around, and 2 weeks later, 57-year-old man is gone.
Yeah. So you get in.
I get in and into this scene, right, where there are probably 15 people all around, and 4 nurses rotating doing CPR. They have the paddles, they're shocking him, they're pumping drugs. At first, the doctor doesn't want to let me in the room, and then the nurse just said, this is his wife. She's been in the parking lot for 7 days. She won't be in your way, because they were trading shifts. That I guess the doctors were on for like a week. She was getting ready to leave, but she said she didn't leave because Bob was so sick when she was getting ready to leave. She just wanted to stay. And then he went into cardiac arrest. And so 45 minutes praying in the room and watching them do CPR, and realizing eventually, like, he's not with us anymore. And the doctor, basically asked me how much longer I wanted them to continue. And I'm pretty sure if I wasn't in the room, they wouldn't have continued that long, But at that point, I just said, no, he's gone,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so kind of surreal at that point. And, I'm sure for your friend and so many thousands and thousands of others. We think about the COVID deaths, and people even, argued like they call everything a COVID death. Well, my husband died from a cardiac arrest, but the cardiac arrest was from a 54 level oxygen. Nobody can handle that. The COVID pneumonia caused the depletion of oxygen, and that depletion caused the heart attack, kidney failure, and other things to happen too. So here we are realizing that, of now, I guess, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. It's not just the person, it's those families and all the relationships and your children, and every death is, says it's precious in the sight of the Lord.
Yeah.
But the grief on earth is real.
Right. So I know that there were thousands of people at his funeral or his memorial service, and something like 19,000 people showed up.
Well, they had, I don't know, a couple of thousand in person. At that time, they'd shut everything down again. But my pastor just said, we'll encourage people to watch online, but if they want to honor Bob, but they'll do what they're going to do. And it ended up really beautiful because we had 19,000 online.
Wow.
And later he told me, he said, Lori, we've never had 19,000 people at one time, right? I'm talking about being online. And he said to me, these aren't people. These are devices. So he said, I know people that are doing, their whole families watching, and, multiple people. He said, I don't even know what the number would be if we had the real number. And what I realized later, the Lord had me in Philippians, studying Philippians for a long time. I kept thinking, can I move on from Philippians? It would be like, no, study Philippians again, And I realized that this was Philippians in a way in Bob's life was being lived out, because Bob at Water of Life's a prominent church, right? He could have had the stage. He could have had the microphone. He could have made a platform. He could have had a position. But instead, he knew his call was to faithfully minister to the one in front of him.
Mhm.
And I can't even imagine how many thousands and thousands of people he did this with, as I keep hearing the stories, right? But he did that. He knew my call is the one. And so after the funeral, there were just thousands of stories coming in, right, about what had happened with Bob. So many, and social media was such a buzz, and so many things were going on that I knew we better do this memorial fast, right? The whole state's going to shut down again.
Mhm.
And so literally the Tuesday, the day after he had died, I told Pastor Dan, let's get together and start planning this thing. It's got to happen fast. And so he called me that morning, Tuesday morning, and he said, Lori, don't come over here. He said, the news media is everywhere. Well, at that time, the news media was targeting churches because of COVID and what they did, if they opened or closed or, it. And so he didn't know what they were doing there. And so he said, just wait until I call you back. And so I'm at home. I just live a couple of blocks from the church. And he called me back and he said, Lori, they're here for Bob. They're here for Bob's story. And he said, I've interviewed a couple of them, trying to make sure they're not trying to turn this into something, that it's
Weird,
not. Yeah. And he said, I think they're genuine. And he said, they want you to come over and talk to them. And he said, I'm not telling you to. Like, you do what you want to do. I'm just telling you what they're doing. And he said, nobody is going to fault you if you don't. And I said, let me call you back in just 1 minute. And I hung up the phone and I was with my friend and I looked at her and she said, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't want to do this. And she said, okay. And I said, but I have to. I said, they're not going to be here in a week when I feel like doing it. This is our only chance to tell the truth about Bob's life and who he was, and that their story will go the way that it needs to go. And I said, so let's go. We're going to go over and talk to them. And what ended up happening is that all of the major news stations picked up the story, showed it again and again. Some of them turned it a little bit weird, but for the most part, they did a really, really good job with it. And, told of Bob and the ministries that he had been doing and what had happened in our life. And then it was only 1 week later, we did the memorial. And
Wow. So I'd like to have you end with the ministry and what the ministry looks like now. I know that you were taking blankets and you've ministered to many, many women that have lost their husbands or some loved one
yes,
to COVID.
yes.
And so talk about that and put it in a nutshell that we can end on a high note as to how to get a hold of the ministries that you're involved with, or if people want to reach out to talk to you personally, or maybe even get involved in some of the grief or prayer room
Sure.
ministries that you're involved with. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, pretty quickly after Bob's death, right, the elders, the pastor, because we had been in ministry for 30 years together, they came and literally, I think they're thinking, how are we going to replace Pastor Bob? Right? Like, who could ever do that? And one of the things that they had said when they came to me is, would you take his job? And I laughed and I said, you got to be kidding me, right? Like, he had a grace and a call and an anointing that I had never seen before, and just who he was, right? And I said, I could never do Bob's job. I don't know who could. And then I said, yeah, I think part of the reason Bob could do his job is I took care of Bob, right? And I said, with my children and my grandchildren, and now this great loss, there's no way. And so they really were just so generous and so open-doored. I felt like it was Bob's favor still, right? And I know it's the both of ours, but it really felt like Bob deserved this big door of favor. And I felt like the Lord was saying, just walk through this door of favor right now. Mm-hmm. And it's just ministry. And little did I know it was going to be such a giant part of my healing process. And then such a great, it just ends up that I know this is what I'm supposed to do. And then as doors would open and I would tell God, I don't know, I'm going to think about it. It literally, like, I'm going to push you off the cliff now, right? I got you, I got this, but I'm going to use this. Right. And so, I ended up first taking a part-time position with the healing rooms, hospital visitation, and some of the prayer and crisis ministries. And then, as in those prayer and crisis ministries, widows were coming, and I'm way more than I expected. And so I started keeping track of them and following up with them. And, then so some of them I started doing their husbands' funerals. Right. And it just became such an honor. People would say, "How do you do a funeral, Lori, when you just lost your husband?" It's like, because I know that when I step in there, in that space that no one else is invited into, right? I understand this day. This is not a job. This is not I have a funeral on my calendar. Like, this is probably the hardest moment of their entire life. And
Yeah.
I feel honored when those positions open up, right? And you get to step into them. And it is hard, right? And so recently I've done some really hard funerals. And then it was like, okay, I went to Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, and a friend had called and said, "Hey, come up and join us." And she knew I was struggling too, right? And she's like, "Just come join us." And I got there late, but when I walked in late and there were like 100 widows in the room,
Yeah.
my knees almost buckled.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking, I'm meeting with one-on-one and they're adding up, but these widows look like me, right? And I knew then, I'm up in the higher area of the Inland Empire, really even extending probably more like up into the high desert and around the foothills area. And I thought, we don't have anything up there. And so I started talking to Kathy, who runs that ministry, Kathy Lewis, and we started talking together. And I said, "Kathy, I think I'm going to start a ministry at our church." She does the second Friday of every month, Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, 6:30 at night. I do the fourth Friday at our church, right? Water of Life Community Church, 6:30. She said, "Lori, people have been telling me they need this every week, and I can't do every week." And I said, "Well, you could do 1 week and I could do 1 week, and I'm praying that those other 2 Fridays get filled up."
Wow.
And little did I know that Hillside, Alta Loma was planning the third Friday of the month.
Perfect.
Right? And now I believe there is a church for the first Friday of the month, and keeping it the same format, that 6:30 to 8:30. We're doing a little different things. We're not copying each other completely.
As the Lord leads.
Right? Just exactly. And the needs
Yeah.
are so great. We could have 100 of these ministries, right? But I love that the leaders, myself and Kathy, and there's other women at Hillside, that we've all started to come together and support each other and talk about how we could do this better and what else could we add to it. And so those ministries are really, unfortunately, taking off right now. So we all have, between 30 and 100 women every time we open our doors.
So in order for the women that are out there to get involved in this, they can either call Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, and it is on a Friday night, the second Friday of every month. And it's at 6:30, or they can go to Water of Life, and it's the fourth Friday of
Actually, this Friday.
This Friday.
Coming
Okay,
up.
Perfect.
And then the third Friday is at Hillside.
Yes.
In Alta Loma.
So that you can reach out to those churches if you want to join us at Women of Worth. Are you calling it Women of Worth as well?
Well, theirs is, I think theirs is called Widows of Worth. And then we're calling ours Blossoming Hearts, which is really just never alone.
Yeah.
And so I think the ministries are taking on their own flavor, right? Like you said, the Lord's leading on how raising up the people that are going to help and be connected. But they all serve a common ministry, right, focus, and that is hope and healing for widows.
Wow. And I want to just announce that if you are looking for prayer, there's always the prayer room there that you're involved with.
Yes.
It's at the same church, right?
Yes. The way that you can really do this, Healing Rooms International, we are an affiliate of them on our campus and have been for, I think, about 17 years. But you can look up Healing Rooms International just online and find a room near you. They're all over the world, really. And so I had a lady the other day that said, "Oh, I'm in Pasadena. I'm going to come to your healing rooms." And I said, "You're perfectly welcome to, but there is one in Pasadena."
Mhm.
And she went, "Oh, I didn't even know." So Healing Rooms International is all over the world. If you want to come in for any kind of healing prayer, they have teams of people that'll pray for you. And so
Wow.
I would strongly suggest to the newly widowed woman, my first suggestion would just be don't isolate, right? Don't be alone. Find someone. You feel like shutting down. You feel like, just hibernating and isolating. The pain's so great, you don't even think you're going to make it.
Yeah.
And little by little, as people that, can care for you and love you come around you, um, you know, everyone's journey is different. And then eventually Grief Share,
Yeah.
right? And Grief Share is another big organization that you just look up, Google Grief Share, put in your zip code, and there will be groups near you. And I highly suggest that kind of a process too. Grief is, I'm a minister, right? I've been a minister for 30 years. I thought I could get myself through this, which is not the case at all. By the time I got to 7 months, I crashed again. And I realized, Lori, you need help. You need people. You just can't minister and think you're ministering to yourself. You have got to realize that you can't get yourself through this.
Okay. Gosh, thank you so much for joining us again.
You're welcome.
I so appreciate you. Listen, if you're out there and have never accepted Jesus or have had a loved one go on and you just need help, give Lori a call there at the church, Water of Life.
Yes.
And she'd be happy to pray with you. Or, okay, prayer.
Healing Rooms International.
Healing Rooms International. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
And give them a call for prayer. But if you'd like to accept Jesus as your Savior, do that today. Just invite him in. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Lori, again for joining us.
Thank you.
We've gone over a little bit, but bye for now. We'll see you next time on The Road with Jesus.
There is a hope and a light that shines.